Hello, thank you for joining us. It is so nice to see everyone. I'm Erica Harrison, and I am the Associate Curator and Festival Director at Tefra Institute of Contemporary Art. Tonight's event is generously sponsored by Reston Community Center, and we also wish to acknowledge the National Endowment for the Arts, the Virginia Commission for the Arts, and Arts Fairfax for their support and our public programs and services. In partnership with Bizzuto and Boston Properties, this innovative satellite gallery space presents a year-round schedule of exhibitions of local artists as selected by our curatorial staff. I would like to express gratitude to the many partnerships, including assistance from Bizzuto Leasing team, the maintenance crew, and the fantastic concierge team that make these exhibitions possible. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Tefra ICA board and staff in support of these projects. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith M. Pratt and her selections of works featured in the undisclosed exhibition at the Tefra ICA Gallery at Signature. Judith M. Pratt was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, and she explores the history of the Piedmont region through its deep-rooted complexities in graphically strong, multi-layered works on paper. Pratt's recent solo exhibitions include 2nd Street Gallery in Charlottesville, Virginia, Hillier Art Space in Washington, D.C., and she was Janet and Walter Sondheim's Artscape Prize semifinalist last year. She is part of the forthcoming triennial group exhibition Homeward Bound 2021 at the Taubman Museum of Art in Roanoke, Virginia. Pratt's work is included in numerous private and public collections, and she has been awarded residencies at the University of Virginia and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She recently served as vice chair and program chair for Washington Sculptors Group. Pratt holds a Master of Fine Arts from American University in Washington, D.C., and a Master of Art in Modern and Contemporary Art History from Christie's in New York. She also served as a curatorial assistant in the Morgan Library Museum in New York. She lives and works in the Washington, D.C. area. What you're seeing on the screen now is the exhibition hallway at Signature. And I want to bring to your attention the introduction music that we heard as you were joining us. It was a musical composition by a 20th century composer and prolific music educator, Undine Moore Smith, who was born in 1904 and died in 1989. She was from Petersburg, Virginia, and attended Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. At the age of 20 in 1924, she became the first graduate of Fisk to receive a scholarship from Juilliard. She became known to some as the Dean of Black Women Composers and created over 100 compositions. Only 26 were published in her lifetime, including the Afro-American Suite in 1969, which we heard an excerpt from. Scenes from the Life of a Martyr, her 16-part chorale cantata based on the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., premiered at Carnegie Hall in 1981 and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. This selection was intentionally made by Judith M. Pratt to highlight a Black woman who grew up in Virginia and was the granddaughter of enslaved people, and to some might be underrecognized for her contributions. This connection to Virginia history and the continuation of our knowledge and building about our own history is the correlation to our discussion this evening. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith M. Pratt and her selections of works featured in Undisclosed, the exhibition at Tefra ICA Signature Gallery.
Thank you, Erica, for that generous introduction. Before we begin talking about the actual work in the exhibition, which is, as Erica said, undisclosed, I'd also like to express appreciation for Tephra ICA to exhibit my work in this particular gallery, the Signature Gallery. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's brilliant to have these two distinct gallery spaces, one a beautiful museum quality venue, and the Signature space, which is also beautiful and is a vibrant, active, urban space. It's a wonderful contrast between the two, and it's the way we see art now, in my opinion. We still see it in that contemplative way of the museum gallery space. We also see it as a split-second reaction to our eye and our brain, and the Signature Gallery really supports that, and I've enjoyed it, and I think it's wonderful. So if you hadn't seen the space already, see if you can get by to see it. It's well worth it. To continue on with what Erica was saying, Indisclosed came about because of the extraordinary socio-political changes happening in the last 4 years, particularly in the Piedmont area. I think most of you remember the white supremacy marches and all of that that came about in 2017. But then it went on to include the death of George Floyd in May 25th of 2020. And then the Black Lives Matter, that wonderful cathartic type of protest that we needed so much, and setting in motion for us to understand and contemplate the significant social and political changes we were going through. And that just, for me personally, just became a huge event, personal, private event in the studio. I knew that I had to do something with that information and take it into visual form. And that's what we're going to see tonight. Excuse me, I'm going to be possibly clearing my throat because of the pollen, which is at the top of what's happening now in the Piedmont. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, and raised in the Piedmont region. And by exploring the history of the Piedmont region and its deep-rooted complexities, especially with regard to racism, I wanted to know, and I needed to know and understand the sense of how place impacts you as an individual, how it forms your identity, even when you may think it's not forming your identity, and how it makes you responsible for the well-being of yourself, other individuals in your community, and in a historical sense, as well as the present sense. And just to give you a little context on who has sort of been my companions, either immediately or not immediately, but in this area, Sally Mann, the photographer, lives in the Piedmont. Cy Twomley, who used to live in the Piedmont and ended up spending his time between Rome and coming back to the Piedmont. It meant that much to him. Georgia O'Keeffe came through, and it made me chuckle. I love this part of Virginia. She came through and she didn't like this part of Virginia. She taught in Chatham for a while, and her parting comment was, I have to get out of here and go to New Mexico because Virginia is so tired and worn out. That was her point of view, not mine. Willa Cather, even though an author, still an artist, and she got her start in Winchester. So I feel like I'm in the right place. I feel like I've always been in the right place. So let's take a look at some of the slides, and Erica's going to help me get through this. What you currently just saw was the long hallway in the Signature space. And just keep in mind, I believe it's 9 feet wide. Is that true, Erica?
Actually, 52 linear feet long, yeah. And then 9 feet wide going this, you know, in the width direction. But there's a really wonderful view that you can get if you enter into where the leasing office is that sort of frames the work. So there's a couple of openings as you traverse down the hall. Yeah. So the 9 feet width makes it intense. You can't miss the work. And so we'll talk about that as I go on, which is something, I think it's a fabulous space. So I wanted to take a quick look at just some factual information and things that were going through my mind over the last several months. And I wanted to get a sense of the US's responsibility with regard to how it treated enslaved people versus other parts of the world.
And you can see very quickly here, the numbers are staggering, but the locations too, the other participating countries, look at Portugal and the UK too. And it's just a way of understanding that this was a global mindset for the most part. The dates are, these bars represent enslaved people coming in through these various countries, 1514 to 1866. So this kind of factual information is important to keep in mind. And so we'll go on to the next slide. And this was some information that Erica provided. It's another way to just look quickly at the fact of enslaved people coming into our country. So it isn't all that much of a surprise to look at South Carolina and North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, but look at the concentration from Williamsburg, Richmond, and into the DC area. The Piedmont is right there between bottom of DC, this text, Washington, DC, and Richmond. And that is extremely intense numbers of enslaved people. And I needed to know that, and I needed to know more about why that was undisclosed. So
I just wanted to point out that I was going to put in the chat the links for these data slides, but it doesn't seem to want to let me do that at the moment. So I will try and do that at the end for anyone who's interested.
Okay, thank you. So on to the next slide. So this is the Piedmont. This is not just a tourist postcard image. This is how beautiful it is. Rolling foothills, hence the term Piedmont, and then the Blue Ridge in the background. It's only 100 miles west of Washington, and yet your whole body and brain responds to this part of the country and this part of the state. So I wanted you to see that. And the next slide shows I take my my camera out and photograph as much of the area. And this is about 5 miles from my studio. And this is also what the Piedmont looks like. There's a very worn, tired quality to parts of the Piedmont. And it's almost as if the land holds the memory of the transgressions of whatever went on in the state in this location. And the next slide. So on the left is immediately behind my studio, and I just keep it there. It's a reminder of struggle, of reforming, forming, secrets, everything that has happened in this area that I grew up in and was born in. And on the right again, Robinson River and the erosion. And this is much a part of what is the Piedmont, as that beautiful first slide. Next slide, please. So we get into what actually forms the work and how I went about forming the work to talk about undisclosed. And on the left, somebody made this suggestion, look at the topographical maps, because it's all about elevation here. So we see those curving elevation lines, but we also see all those little ovoid looking shapes dotted throughout. Those are grave sites for enslaved people. They are unidentified people. And so you have to take in what that means, what it means to not provide a memory of people. So on the left, or excuse me, on the right is a large drawing, 5 by 5, done just in response to that. And I hope that you can pick up on the tension and the disturbance and also the beauty of it at the same time. There's so many contradictory things about undisclosed, and that's all I can do with it, is deal with the contradictions, but also hope to reveal a few truths. And so the next slide. So what do I do with these contour lines, and what do I do with these unmarked grays? So this is just a detail from one of the large drawings that you'll see in a minute. But I wanted you to see how I took the curved lines and the geometric shapes, the rectangle here that represents the unmarked grave, and took it into a composition that held some meaning. And here I would like to mention the fact that Roberta Smith had a huge impact on my thinking about this body of work. She, I believe it was in a 2019 review in the New York Times, and she is the senior art critic. I've considered her very fair and very honest about her insights and perceptions about artwork and about how things are represented. And she said that just based on what she was following in the exhibitions that she was seeing in New York, depicting an enslaved person or an African-American person by a white person was not permissible. So I knew from the start that I had to come up with iconography that was respectful, but at the same time, in an abstract way, conveyed essential information. So that's what this slide is to explain. And then we'll go to the next slide. This is the hardest imagery for me to show you. But again, it reinforces what I was trying to include in the imagery that I was doing. So this is a diagram of a enslaved person transport, the ship or ships that would take enslaved people from Africa into the US. And I believe this particular one was from a UK diagram. And again, look at the iconography just in this drawing and how impacted that was with enslaved people and what that meant and what that means and what that is important for us not to forget, regardless of who we are and where we come from. It's our responsibility to keep it in our hearts, so to speak. So it became very easy to want to take this iconography on the right side here and translate it into the drawings. And that's what I tried to do. So next slide. Just one final way of gathering research information. So the map, the very crude map on the left, shows all those hatch marks, which again are unmarked slaves. The apostrophes that you see interspersed within those is their horses. Humans and horses were buried together. It's just something that I keep in my mind when I'm working. And I translated it into this wall hanging on the right. This rectangular shape, this cutout shape, became a matrix for pulling all of this body of work together and having some consistent type of visual element that could speak to the unmarked graves. Next slide, please. So here we're seeing just sort of playing around in the studio, trying to see what an installation would look like using two-dimensional pieces and three-dimensional pieces. It really doesn't represent anything that I've shown in a gallery. It's just what happens in the studio. And again, remarking again about the rectangles and the matrix and the symbol of what we have to come to terms with racially. So I think we're going to take a look at these three main drawings that are in Undisclosed. Yeah, here's the first one. So I call them stations. I had to keep storytelling to myself to stay on point and to also keep it on a deep level and a respectful level. And I started thinking about how am I going to explain symbolically or in a parable or in an allegory what has happened to and between races of people. So the Stations of the Cross it just became a natural thing to think about. And it has to do with how we are treated as individuals, how we suffer, how we become impacted by our environment and our community. So I just sort of made a story and brought it into the drawing. So the central rectangle there is symbolic of the enslaved person. And the smaller rectangles represent, of course, again, the unmarked slaves. the symbol of the enslaved person carries that memory in them. The community, these undulating figure forms on either side flanking the rectangular form, again, do not depict the enslaved person, do not transgress. So I just found them as a way to show, in this case, this looks pretty supportive. The central rectangle is upright. The community, abstract community around them is varied and looks supportive. It looks like a positive situation. But as we know in Stations of the Cross, it didn't stay that way. So let's go on to the next slide. And things start to happen. The central rectangular figure starts to fall over or starts to topple. Something's happening. We don't have to know what. We know it has to do with some kind of impingement on that person. But notice that the figures, the abstract figures, and behind the rectangular form are starting to look a little stiff, a little reticence. It doesn't look like there's a great deal of support going on. And over to the extreme right, you see almost like a cyclone form that looks like it, might be helping this central figure not to be able to be upright anymore. I mean, this may sound almost, it just sounds unusual, but it's the only way I could deal with all of this information and honestly incorporate it into the work. And so the next slide is the third station.
Actually, Judith, we're going to stop and do a quick detail and talk a little bit about the materials, because we have a question from Delna Dasser, who's also an artist. Hi, Delna. It's been a long time. What drawing materials are you using? Are they pencils or markers?
Good question. This is an underpainting of solid one color acrylic paint. And then I use the Molotow ink, acrylic ink markers, and they're acid-free, they're perfectly good materials. So I use them both. And when I started out with the series, like any marker, the points are precise, almost mechanical. But as you keep going and you just keep going over surface after surface, they soften up, they get blunted. And so it became almost like painting. And you can see the blues on the right are overlap white, and down there toward the central bottom of this detail, it starts to become a painterly process. So I enjoyed that. I wasn't expecting it, but you just kind of go with it as it happens.
And then do you want to talk about the significance of the surface on which you are putting the acrylic markers?
Tell me what
the type of paper you're using.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, all of the pieces in the undisclosed and a previous body of work is Lenox 100 paper. It's 100% cotton, and it was specifically chosen to represent the plight of an enslaved person and the industry that they served in this country in the state of Virginia. So that's what that was for.
And I'm going to jump in here as, curator. What was really interesting to me was that the three stations that we just looked through, and then one more piece, are all 5 feet by 5 feet on this heavy paper that's been painted. And so it was a real challenge to try to figure out how best to show these works on paper while still being able to keep them safe and see them. And I think that we did a really good job. I'm very proud of the solutions that we came up with, but it's amazing to see these textures in person. And Sophia has set up an online viewing room for us so that we can see some greater detail as well.
Yes, thank you for bringing that in, because, I mean, Eric and I started working on this project in July of 2020. And then to go all of those months and come to the installation part and understand that we really didn't have an immediate, effective way of protecting the work. And I didn't really want it to be covered. I didn't want there to be a frame with glass or acrylic. These are not objects. This is, for me, they're not objects. So I don't want them put on the wall like objects. They're to impact you as directly as possible. So I think it was a great solution, and there's rope and stanchion that, in front of the exhibition, and it works beautifully. So thanks to Tefra and Erica for that. It was a great solution. So here's number 3. This is the least optimistic, but we know in the Stations of the Cross that Christ fell 3 times, and he was able to get up, and people, ironically, mostly women, stepped up to help him and to carry him through. I'm going to go on with this series, so I'm looking forward to seeing how I can resolve that in this particular group of drawings. But here, the symbolic rectangular figure is prone, has finally become horizontal. It cannot support itself under these conditions. The community has basically ganged up on it on the top of the composition, so it's pressing down. It's not likely that things will get better, and the group at the very bottom is not significant enough to help erect and bring that rectangular form back to vertical again. So it's a combination of looking to other sources to help me understand what happens to people and what we do to people as races and other forms of existence. And it's just been a great exploration.
Judith, one of the things that you shared with me was your sense of responsibility in making this work. And I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and how it relates to your religious practice.
Sure. I just felt it like everybody else did. Between George Floyd's death and just the surge of emotion that came up with Black Lives Matter, it wasn't as if I had a choice. I just had to do something. I don't have I don't practice any particular religion, but I do follow Taoism. I find it extremely helpful. It's a philosophy, not a religious practice. And it continually points the individual back to your responsibility. If you're going to figure it out, you have to dig deeper. It can't come from a hierarchy. So I just constantly visit those teachings, that philosophy, and bring it into the work as much as I can. So just showing you various things that are now stacked around the studio. So I try to get off of just 2-dimensional work and bring it back into the installation process. So these are just totems or figures that again carry the symbol of the unmarked grave. And those little white boxes that separate the 2 top and bottom pieces just was a response to George Floyd's death. It was a way of symbolically representing it.
Is that because of the gap in between? Are you pulling like iconography that you've drawn on paper into the sculpture?
Yes, more or less. Yeah, exactly. Just trying variations of what I can do with the formal elements. Yes.
And you also shared that these may be elaborated on for a different type of installation. We had talked about doing in the hallway, but in the end decided not to. But do you want to talk about that a little bit? One of those ideas that we had with these totems.
Yeah, it always helps to have another eye and input, which don't be shy tonight. I'd love to hear your input. At one point I was showing Erica just some of these JPEGs that I had taken in the studio, and I moved stuff around. And her suggestion was, you know, this could make a whole installation by itself, just using the totems. So these ideas are wonderful. I keep them. I don't know where the next installation or exhibition will be, but it's exactly what pushes you into the next dimension, the next level of your work. So I was glad to have, that's when a good curator is working on your behalf to give you ideas.
Well, and also, I mean, we found that in the signature space, because these are objects that come out into the space at a much greater width, that, you know, the practicality of having people walk by them just wasn't really going to work in that space. But as a linear installation, I think you had wanted to put the totems up against the wall and then invite people to stand next to them.
Yes.
And really insert themselves into the installation, which I think, again, could be in a gallery, a different gallery space, would be pretty amazing, especially if there were multitudes.
Yes, I always wanted to find a way to add an interactive component. And when we were looking back at the slide of the slave ship, one of the things that I really wanted to do was put two of these totems with research and find the distance that was given between one enslaved person and another, and put those totems against the gallery wall and let the visitor, the viewer, step in that space and experience what that must have been like, only having that amount of space to really exist for a long period of time. So yeah, there's just so many ideas that come up in the process of working on an installation. I just wish there were more time and more time and more materials. So I also, even though this isn't in the current exhibition, this is in the preceding body of work, which is titled Point of Origin, again, having to do with my point of origin and the Piedmont. One of the things that I did was created hides, and it literally means the hide of, in this case, a human being. It's a flat sheet of paper, quite large, something like 84 by 60, and it's painted on two sides, black on one side, yellow on the other, and then these incised rectangles over and over and over again. But it's just a flat sheet of paper, it's inert. It has no resonance at that stage. But when I pick it up, and I pick it up by two corners, and then hang it with just two push pins, it falls into this gestural type of form, a sculptural, close to the wall, but still a sculptural form. And I found it to be very evocative of just imagining what life probably was or could have been for many people in the state of Virginia at a certain time. Detail, so just so that you see, there's nothing unusual or dramatic. It's just the Lenox 100 paper, acrylic paint, and cutting the shapes. It's very meditative. I tried to make it very respectful as I was doing it as a practice. So I'm close to these hides. I really am close to them. And just another point of view, the nice thing about it, I can take all of these elements, the two-dimensional drawings, 5 by 5 footers, these large wall hangings, the totems, and I can rearrange them. I can make another story just by rearranging them. However, it strikes me in the studio any given day. So I just wanted you to see that possibility. And I also just wanted to give you a sense of how it looks in a gallery space. And this was the point of origin work with a couple of other pieces added. And this was at 2nd Street Gallery in Charlottesville in 2018. And I also like to install on the floor too. Another view of going down the signature corridor. And I have a couple of stories to tell you. The highlight of installing this show was the reaction from people coming in and leaving the building. And people were so wonderful. One young man was just walking really fast, and he looked at the station drawings, and he said, "Ah, is that digital or traditional? And it caught me off guard, and I didn't know exactly what he meant. And so I just said, oh no, it's by the hand. And he said, oh, cool, and kept going. I love that. Two women reacted to the red drawing and came by and talked to Erica and I. And they said, what's this? Is there any information about this work? What is it about? And I said, it's about racism. And one of the people's eyes got really big in a good way. I mean, she was really interested. And she said, oh, that's wonderful. And then I think Erica said, we'll have some information that'll be at the head of the corridor, and you can see it, pick it up later. That to me is golden. I just need to hear and see those kinds of things. And the final story is two gentlemen that worked for the building, in the building. They had their tool belts on, and they stopped and were looking at that far right drawing that you see there on the screen. And they kept looking at it. They stood there for quite a while. And I had a mask on, and I came down just to kind of get a sense of what was intriguing them. And he said, are you the artist? I said, yeah. And he said, I really like this design. And I said, great. If you have a chance, come back and look some more. And it was a wonderful day. I really loved it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about these Piedmont pieces and how they tie to the stations? I think you might be able to see in the far side of the slide, it's the 3 stations. So the way the show is set up is the 3 stations first, and then these 3 works, and then there's 2 more.
Yes. So as you know, bodies of work evolve. They start somewhere, they end somewhere, something else happens, and elements are picked up and you move forward. These that you see in front of you now were the point of origin series. So it started my preoccupation with the Piedmont and what happened here, what was disclosed to me and what wasn't disclosed to me. A lot of this point of origin series is about the physical elements of the land. So you've got the topographical red piece, that one on the left that's sort of wavy, Robinson River, and Taoism saying you can stand by the river and it's always new because the water keeps moving. The one on the far right, just every time you drive down Route 15, you see another kind of agricultural design through the fields, through the animals. It's just love of the location that comes out in this work. But as I've said a couple of times, when we got to 2020, it became all socio-political. And I just went right into that. It was like I had no choice. I went right into that iconography. So I've always been in awe of the artistic process and how it evolves, not just in my work, but all artists' work. It's a study unto itself. So there's that piece again. I don't title it, I just say Untitled Piedmont number 5, but that's Robinson River. If you stand by the river, you're going to see that. And the topography, I also will say that sometimes it's just conceptual. Like if you look at the very top of that drawing, I just start out with one line. I have no idea, as I keep repeating the line, how it's going to evolve, what kind of forms will start coming out or going away. So in this, it's almost something of a, not a miracle, that's putting it too dramatically, but it's just this utter love of the process where you keep going and something gets revealed to you, and sometimes you don't even know you have it in you to do it. And that's one of the pieces that this is. I didn't know how it was going to evolve.
Are you looking at anything when you're drawing, when you're using your hand to do that?
No, it's totally in the process.
And How about the decisions? Lizzie Pittman asked the decision of when to use cutouts and for the small grave shapes, and when to use the negative space like in the wall sculptures.
I think it just comes, particularly in repetitive, large scale pieces like we're seeing tonight. It's just a way of relieving, you can only do so much, and I don't like it to not be fresh. If it gets stale and predictable, then I move to the cutout things, and then I go back to the two-dimensional pieces. So it's a way of keeping myself interested and also sort of honest. I don't want skill to dominate the work, because that's what, in my opinion, that's where when it can go dead. So I want to keep it sort of keep me off center a lot.
Well, I would hardly call these unskilled. Do you mean that if they become too polished?
Predictable, you get too complacent with your tool, the materials. You have to keep, in my opinion, what keeps me going into the studio is keeping it unknown, constantly challenged, and constantly trying to be honest. Sometimes for me personally, now I don't want to say this like it applies to other people. I don't. But for me, if I get caught up in the skill part, it kind of gets to be phony. There's nothing, it's not as engaging. It's plus you have to challenge yourself to do more, to do better, kind of things, pushing yourself constantly. That feels like my job rather than doing something attractive or pretty.
So the change in scale between these works, which I realize on the screen is hard for people to see, but again, this red piece is 5 feet by 5 feet. And then the small, I'm saying small, but they're, a good 30 inches high by 20 inches wide of the black and white. I mean, that's a pretty big jump in scale. And then to take it to the wall and do the hide pieces, you really are setting yourself up for this exercise in movement and challenging your space.
Yes. Yeah, and not to sound like I'm this extraordinary explorer, I did the smaller scale pieces first just to make sure that it would work out. I didn't want to be that. I really didn't want it to. I like to succeed with the work, but I also feel a great obligation to always challenge myself. Yeah. And with the paperwork, the hangings that you just saw, as much as I love them, they're just dreadful to transport, and there's always the risk of paper tearing. That's a real challenge, but I still feel that it's important to do that in sized. Cutting somehow for me subject-wise plays into the issue of racism as just a metaphor.
I think also with the specters and the hides, we had initially envisioned that they would be, at least 2 of them were going to be in this exhibition. Mm-hmm. And then it was in that creative process during installation when it was really apparent that the effect of the hanging, the drapery, mm-hmm. wasn't quite there. And so with Judith's really kind of excellent premonition of bringing these drawings to installation, we actually came up with this other plan. So it was kind of a really fortuitous and collaborative process.
It was a rather magical day, because like you said, we just tried several things, and it's not just a brain response, it's a whole body response when you install work. And I was insistent that we include these specters, which Erica was not too keen on. And as soon as we got them up, I went, no, this isn't working. So it's a wonderful process. If you can ever kind of stand in and participate in an installation. Just be the observer. It's a wonderful thing to do and see. So this is the end. And again, I want to make a comment about the signature space. It's very dramatic. Look at this architectural detail. And one might think, well, that's going to interfere with the artwork. It did not. It just accentuated the installation even more. Did you feel that way, Erica?
Yeah, you know, I always keep in mind the end of the hallway when I'm thinking about the space as an anchor point. And so there's usually pretty early on in the process when I lay out the shows, I always sort of designate, okay, what piece is really going to call us in? What piece is going to direct our attention down the hall and help to show the narrative or to bring in the energy? And the Piedmont number 4, which is the wood grain, really, I think somebody else referred to it as a spider web. I mean, it's this tunnel, a cyclone, I think you've talked about before. And I really liked the idea that you had to travel all the way down the hall and look at all of the works and take this journey to get to the center of what we are talking about. Mm-hmm. That it was really important to have that experience. And you know, there's a comment that there's a great echo of memorializing a feeling or event or a touch, even though time has passed. And thank you, Lizzie, for reading my mind, because my sister gets it. So yeah, like really making that apparent in the work, I think is super strong.
You can't help it. You really can't help it. This area is still about 86% agricultural and untouched land. Only 100 miles, as I said before, west of Washington, and it's like another planet. They're both very vital areas, but for different reasons. And you can get down here just to enjoy it for a day or two. I recommend it. It'll affect your vision. So this one, throughout my work way back, I was affected by dawns and dusks. And even though this is a non-objective piece, again, just the use of the line against a solid color of acrylic paint, it has something to do with dusk here. This is the way it looks here. And there's a calming down of the animals. There's a calming down of the fields, the wind's not blowing at dusk. And so there was something of that in that, not literally, again, it comes through your body. And I may not be thinking those exact words, but I really strongly believe whatever environment you're in, that will impact your body and your brain. And just so you know that these pieces aren't mechanical, look at how uncontrolled those lines are with the markers. And I like that too. It's the hand. I always like to keep the hand, and I thought it was wonderful that the young man thought it was a digital image, but it's very much, it shows the vulnerability of the hand. And that one too. And just line, you can express so much with line, and that also shows a fragility, to me, shows a fragility and vulnerability within the overall drawing.
Yeah, this is the last piece in the exhibition and the end of our slideshow. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. But we have, so we're about 4 minutes to 7. So we might go a little over tonight. Anybody who wishes to ask a question, please do so. Raise your hand or put it in the chat. Really appreciate your generosity tonight, Judith. Thank you. I'm just going to wait just a minute or two to see if anybody wants to not be shy. I promise I'll unmute you. While we're waiting, Susan Hotstetler, who was also an artist that showed at Signature not that long ago, it feels like. She says, exceptional work, Judith, in both spaces, Signature and 2nd Street. Amazing installation of your work, and so powerful, the impetus for your work. And that's one of the great things about this particular exhibition. It's the, you know, it's this meeting, this melding of strong graphic work that can be in a residential space. You can access it very easily, and yet behind it, there's a lot of care, a lot of sensitivity, and a lot of meaningful content. Sharon Fischel from McLean Project Center for the Arts says she's fascinated by the skeletal sense of your line and space, as well as the hide forms as sculpture.
Thank you.
And that is okay, Susan, you don't have to talk. Well, I think I did want to ask a question really quick about the contradictions that you brought up at the beginning. A little bit of, you know, the idea behind giving of yourself, and then also trying to bring up things that maybe you don't have any control over, and recognize your own legacy and the things that are meaningful to you in a little bit of your background. I think you shared that this work is a way of making personal amends. And so I wondered if you wanted to go into that a little bit, and then we will close this out.
Yeah, again, the impact of 2020, and I just personally had to do something. I didn't know that that the work was going to come out of the studio and end up at Signature. And the fact that, you know, I had a good upbringing here and I had a good family, and yet all of this stuff was undisclosed. I could not even come to terms with that. And the fact that now, in the last 2 years particularly, these discoveries of unmarked graves is all around the Charlottesville area. It's like this radius out from Charlottesville area. And also just feeling bereft at the ignorance of about our history, the mythology of parts of our history. I didn't know that Thomas Jefferson had over 6,000 enslaved people at Monticello. I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? I'm 4 miles from James Madison's. The studio is 4 miles from James Madison's plantation of enslaved people as well being discovered, buried there. I just don't know what happened. I don't know how to deal with us as a culture. And I feel why not feel very responsible for it? So the only way I have to deal with it is through my artwork. It's that sort of fundamental. And I still feel joy when I'm here, and I still feel like I have something to say with my artwork about it. And so when I talked about this fairly recently with another group of people, and I said, well, based on Roberta Smith's comment, do I have a right as a white Southern female artist to say something about race in Virginia? All I could say to that was my intentions are very sincere, but the question remains unanswered, and that's all I can say about it.
Well, thank you, Judith. Thank you for your generosity and your openness and your honesty. Putting together a show like this takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate our audience for being open to the discussion, and our board and our staff for standing behind the project. And also, Judith, keep making work. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Michelle Monteballo, thank you for asking the question. Although TEF for ICA at Signature is not currently open to the public, The exhibition's online viewing room is now available. And Sophia Bloom has done an amazing job putting that website together, and I will load that into the chat. I will also say that some of these works are looking for a new home. So they are for sale. And if you do decide to purchase, just let me know. The proceeds will directly support the artists and Tephra ICA's programs throughout the year. Of course, they do need to stay up for the duration of the exhibition. Before we leave, we have a special treat. I'm going to turn it over to Janelle Hazard, who is our executive director and curator. And thank you.
There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Janelle Hazard. Erica, thank you for the introduction. Judith, thank you so much. There is great importance and almost service in your work. You know, you mentioned unidentified people, undisclosed stories, what it means to not memorialize life and spirit. My 2-year-old is here, COVID times. You're conveying really essential information and essential history, exactly as you described. And throughout your talk, you mentioned respect frequently in the presentation of these works, from the level of care that is evident down to the very detail of the line work, to the symbolism and the material that you use. So I think there's great beauty in what you're doing. You're allowing the audience to sink in. The repetition that you do creates an almost hypnotic effect, yet you allow the audience to walk away with something big, something impactful. Your quote from Taoism is something that I will walk away with tonight. You can stand by the river, it's always new because the water keeps moving. So that's really great. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and our audience and our community. And Erica, thank you for curating this selection of work and bringing this very important dialogue to the forefront. Thank you everyone for engaging with us tonight. Judith, Erica, thank you again. In regards to other programs, we have our solo exhibition by Gisela Colon, who I think is attending the program tonight here. Her show is called Quantum Shift. It's currently on view in the main gallery at Tephra ICA. We are open for in-person visits, limited appointments in advance, or you can explore the online viewing room. So we're actually pleased to share, you may have seen the announcements, that at this very moment, we are in the middle of an installation of one of Gisela's sculptures in Washington, D.C., steps away from the National Mall, the White House, and the Smithsonian's Renwick Gallery. It will be on view beginning this Saturday, so we're incredibly excited to install our first installation, the first exhibition in DC. Please stay connected with us on social media. We can be found at Tephra ICA, or sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on all things Tephra. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great evening.